Hello and welcome to the Green Canary. Today on the pod, we will recap the State of the Environment report, which was finally made public last week after a 6-month delay of possibly sitting in a bottom drawer getting dusty. We're going to talk about what was in it, what jumped out at us, and we're going to tell you about that in a second. We're also going to revisit the government's 43% emissions reduction target, which is no doubt going to dominate the news cycle this week as it might pass through Parliament, yet to see. We've also got a very special interview on why your green super fund is nowhere near as green as you think. There are some shocking details in that interview that Ant did. And we're also going to be talking a lot about crocs. Why not? Do you like crocodiles, Ant?
I do absolutely not like crocodiles. And there's a river down in Queensland. Look, we'll get there at the end of the pod, but I cannot believe how many crocs are in the Proserpine River just near the tourist strip of sort of Airlie Beach. I don't want to know about that, but look, we'll have to talk about it later on. But there's something even more frightening than crocodiles, really.
What is that?
It is the state. This is one of my segues, Elfie. It is the state of Australia's environment.
Yes. Okay. So this week, as you probably well know, the State of the Environment report was released by Environment Minister Tanya Plibersek. She said a lot of kind of inflammatory things. Well, we won't say inflammatory. We'll just say quite hard things at her press club statement, didn't she? She was talking about how maybe the previous government had sort of kept this under wraps purposefully. Ant, you watched it. What did she say?
She had 2 or 3 cracks at the previous government, and she absolutely alleged that it had been suppressed because it would have been bad news in the election cycle. Now, we all sort of suspected as much, but it was very interesting to hear the new Federal Environment Minister absolutely say it in such distinct terms. And look, overall, I was quite impressed by Tanya Plibersek, but as we said in the intro, I think a lot of people watched that, or at least they consumed news coverage from the point of view of a podcast produced on a Monday, as we are. Last Wednesday's news isn't always enticing to people, so I thought rather than go through all of the pros and the cons of what was a pretty damning report on the state of Australia's environment, thought I'd throw to you, and you can throw back to me afterwards, but I thought I'd just throw to you on what stood out for you, Elfie.
Yeah, sure. It's a very interesting question. Look, there was a lot of shocking information in the report, like you said. You know, I think there was a statistic that said that New South Wales fire season has now extended to almost 8 months of the year.
Wow.
Not great news. I think that it also said that something like 39 mammals had gone extinct in Australia since colonisation. Also not great news. That's the most of any continent. Wow. But to my mind, I picked this bit because it has been in the news a little bit recently, and I think it's something we're going to see a lot more of in the coming years. But basically, the report went pretty hard on the current Environmental Protection and Biodiversity and Conservation Act of 1999. So we know that a review of that act was done in 2020. And the State of the Environment report kind of went a bit hard at it and said that it's not fit for purpose, it's completely ineffective, and it doesn't require the minister to take climate change into account when making decisions around fossil fuel projects. So, yeah, I think that was really interesting to me because I did go back and have a look at the 2016 report. It was very different. It was a very soft approach to talking about the EPBC. So, yeah, I think that was really fascinating. And I do think that this is maybe the start of turning tides on that act and hoping to see some legislative change in the coming years.
I would like to see the EPBC have a less tongue-twisting acronym. For a start,
God.
I think they should rename the act. That should be their first act. Should be renaming the act. But you're right. It needs tightening. It needs all sorts of things done to it. It was interesting to hear that addressed. And yeah, look, I think for me, couple of things stood out really quickly. There was just one line in there. It said Australia now has more foreign plant species than native ones. And that was just incredible to me. I mean, you think of Australia sort of in your mind's eye, and you sort of think of, a few planted trees, a few crops, and just mallee and gum trees extending to the horizon, and then you hit the nullarbor, but it's not that way. I mean, more than half of our landmass, more than half of our plants are now foreign species, not natives, which
that
absolutely
is so bizarre.
Actually, there was another stat in there which just came to mind that Also, approximately half of Australia is devoted to, drumroll, ... cattle grazing.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me, actually.
Half of the country is making Big Macs.
Oh, God. You should read Saul Griffith's recent book. What was it called? Electrify Everything? Is that what it's called?
No, it's called The Big Switch.
The Big Switch.
And
that's the subtitle.
We both have a copy.
Yes, we both have a copy. And he speaks about sort of transforming cattle grazing fields into solar farms.
Wow.
In theory, and how much energy that would produce. Mind-boggling. Absolutely wild.
Wow, rather than, the energy consumed and the emissions created. Definitely not going for a steak after the pod today. But look, so there was that about the foreign plant species. Also, I just couldn't get past the Murray-Darling Basin. I mean, Tanya Plibersek told us that the Morrison government, by the time they left office, they had only delivered two of the promised, I had to say two twice, like a sound check, two of the promised 450 gigalitres. What happened to the other 448 gigalitres?
Wow.
I'm speaking about environmental water for the Murray-Darling Basin. That is an unbelievable emission. And look, the Murray-Darling is one of my pet issues. Do you remember back over summer, we ran a pod with Matt Herring. He's an ecologist
I
that
do
works
remember
there.
that.
He took us out to the Low Bidgie, which is swamps at sort of the bottom end of the Murrumbidgee River, which is the third longest river in the MDB. And it was teeming. It was teeming with life. It was terrific. It was in great nick, as they say in cricket. And that's not always going to be the case because we've had a couple of La Nina summers. It's often in pretty bloody bad condition. And it's one of my pet issues. And it was great to see Tanya Plibersek say that this is important. We're going to do, she said it's going to be really hard, but she said we're going to do what we can to at least get close to some of those targets for something like 450 gigalitres. And you speak about tone overall, without wanting to go on too much, I thought the tone was nice of her speech. Now, it wasn't a perfect speech. She cut off one of my mates, a journo that you and I have both worked with in the past, and sort of dismissed his question. She was a little short on detail and very long on ambition. Far from a perfect speech. So we're not having a massive crush on the new Environment Minister here, but what we are having a crush on is the tone. Because the tone was that the environment is now important again. The environment is no longer a nuisance. It's as important as the economy.
Yeah, sure. Not to be sitting in the bottom drawer of an office, to actually be there, being acknowledged. Yeah,
exactly.
I totally agree with you.
And, I wrote in our newsletter all about that last week. You should subscribe to our newsletter. I usually do the plug at the end. But hello@thegreencanary.co. One little email would have got you a big analysis of that. The way that we've sort of been numbed into thinking that we can just get away with treating the environment like we have, but we can't. And Tanya Plibersek's speech, as I say, releasing the State of the Environment report, though far from perfect, though short on detail in areas, changed the tone.
Yes, absolutely. And there was a funny quote that you actually picked up from the end of that speech as well, didn't you?
Oh, look, I'm so glad you mentioned that. It was just kind of, it was Tanya Plibersek forgetting the details. I think she got away with it. I think she covered it really well. Let's have a listen.
We're doing such amazing things. We're protecting in small amounts little areas, northwest New South Wales, setting aside areas where cute little hopping things are being released back into the environment. And, we're bringing species back from the brink of extinction.
You know what? I actually love that.
Yeah, look, I mean, we're 39 mammal extinctions since colonisation, but we're doing things to... I'm tapping the table again. I've just been warned about that so many times. We're doing things to protect the little hopping things. That's all that matters.
Oh, good. Okay. All right. Well, now let's stay in government, shall we, and continue to talk about what the Labor Party is doing, because this week, they are going to be introducing the 43% emissions reduction bill into Parliament. So this is something that we have spoken about before. We know that there is opposition from certain camps. Ant, how are you feeling about it? What are you seeing in the news this week?
Well, I mean, I still think the best analysis on it was our podcast last week. We spoke to Gavin McFadden from the ACF about it, and they're supporting Labor's 43% emissions reduction target. They're not the only environment group to do that. We pointed out last week that some of the hippies, some of the activists are the people who are normally opposed to this sort of thing are saying, get it done, floor not a ceiling. As we warned you last week, we'd be saying that phrase a bit. Just put something in concrete and we can work from there. So the fight this week is going to be whether the Greens in particular see it that way as well. Now Adam Bandt did, I think, a very cryptic tweet today. He said, this week there are more Greens than ever in the 47th Parliament. Thanks to you. Our grassroots, people-powered movement is sending a record 16 Greens MPs to Canberra this week. Every one of them will fight for real action on climate ... So whether that's a signal saying we won't budge, or whether that's a signal saying we'll let the 43 go, but we're going to have some serious conditions, and it looks like one of the conditions is going to be a no to fossil fuel projects, or at least some sort of mechanism to make them a lot harder. And David Pocock, the ACT senator, has spoken about that, hasn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. So he is obviously one of the crossbenchers in the Senate. He's probably going to end up being the deciding vote. And he has called for a climate trigger to be added to Australia's national environmental laws. In simple terms, that means that it would require the Federal Environment Minister to consider the impact in a major development and whether it would have impact on the climate, whether or not deciding it can go ahead. So this is actually something we covered on the pod a couple of weeks ago. I think this was when you were away, actually. But basically, a Queensland group has challenged this in their EPBC, and it is something that environmental groups have been calling for a while now. We're seeing action on it, and it could be very interesting to see if David Pocock could make that happen.
It is. And, my hope is that some sort of compromise like that happens. My hope is that the 43% gets through. We start aiming a whole lot higher, perhaps pre-2030, but certainly when we set the new 2035 target, which has to be done separately. But meanwhile, maybe we can get 43% plus a much harder look at any of the as many as 27 fossil fuel new projects that are on the table.
Yes.
So that's the sort of compromise. But I think say no more for now, because this will play out this week. We talked about it last week. We'll have a lot to say on it next week. Let's let it go and let's move to not a good story. I couldn't believe when I read this. This is new analysis by a group called Market Forces. They're an organisation that sort of holds the banks and super funds and others accountable. And make sure that they're not financing environmentally destructive projects. And they've analysed some of the biggest super fund investments, and 8 of the 11 that they analysed did not stack up. They said we're doing green investing, and they are not.
Wow.
According to Brett Morgan from Market Forces, who's a campaigner there. So I thought I'd better get old mate Brett on the line, ask him how on earth they are getting away with it. So let's roll that interview. Brett Morgan, I am shocked, I tells you, that the superannuation that I thought was being invested in green places is actually going to dirty places. You have done research with your company Market Forces. Please tell me what's going on.
Well, sorry to hear you're shocked, but I'm hoping that I can at least alleviate some of that. But before doing so, look, this analysis we've done quite recently has looked at the investment options labelled sustainable or socially responsible of some of Australia's biggest super funds. And what we've found is that many of them actually aren't necessarily living up to their labels. So 8 of the investment options in our analysis we found were invested in companies that are undermining climate action by expanding the scale of the fossil fuel industry. And the reason we've done this analysis is because Market Forces has been working with tens of thousands of super fund members over the years who are concerned about where their super fund is investing their retirement savings and the climate impact of those investments. And importantly, when challenged over these investments in companies expanding the fossil fuel industry, super funds will often actually point their members to their sustainable investment options. So it's clear, though, that some of these products are failing to live up to their labels.
How does this happen? If I go to the shop and buy a bag of salt and vinegar chips, I expect there to be chips with the flavour salt and vinegar in there. If I tell my super fund to invest green, how does it invest brown, if you like?
Well, that is a really great question. And I think in a lot of ways it comes back to how super funds disclose their investments to their members. So until very recently, only a couple of months back, really, super funds had no requirements to disclose their holdings in any standardized way. But new regulations actually came into effect quite recently that require funds to now disclose their holdings in a standard format. So we've analyzed these super funds investments and found exactly which ones were investing in the global companies most responsible for expanding the fossil fuel industry. And as you've just flagged, the worst thing about this is the fact that some of these super funds are really letting their members down. Members who actively choose to invest in a product which is labeled sustainable, people expect that's what they're going to get. However, it obviously would come as quite a big shock to then discover that this so-called sustainable investment option is invested in companies that are undermining climate action.
So, just almost a yes or no answer. Are they just being sneaky? Are they deliberately misleading us?
Well, I would say that these funds are certainly greenwashing. Some of these funds that are claiming to, sell or market sustainable products that are actually invested in fossil fuel companies, that is greenwashing. And quite recently, the Australia's corporate regulator, ASIC, actually published some guidance on greenwashing, specifically for super funds and the financial services industry, and how to avoid greenwashing. And so this guidance talks about how products that are sustainability related, that are not true to label, or perhaps using vague terminology, they could actually be breaching misleading and deceptive conduct or disclosure rules. And so what's happening here is that super funds are potentially misleading consumers and contravening the regulator's advice. And so because of this, Market Forces has actually referred the findings of our analysis to ASIC for further investigation. And whether or not any rules are actually being broken is something we'll leave to ASIC.
Right. I mean, I ploughed through a little bit of ASIC stuff in preparation for this interview. I read, where they did set some guidelines. I believe it was last year they first went about doing that. And there were some amazing facts there. Sustainability labelled investments doubled, ASIC told me, between 2019 and 21. So this is a massively growing sector. But the key phrase there is sustainability labelled investments. So they're labelled sustainable, but we don't know they are. So that's a wind up to a big question. And the question goes, who's waving the big stick here, Brett? Does ASIC have a stick? I want them to. I want them, once they've read the stuff that you've sent through to them this week, to go, right, crackdown time. I've just banged the table. They're always telling me not to do that, but I did just bang it. But it's crackdown time. No more. Is that going to happen?
Well, the good news is beyond the funds that we've analysed, there are actually some funds out there doing the right thing, and included in our analysis too. There were 3 funds that we turned up that didn't have their sustainable investment options, didn't have any investments in.
Who are they? Who are the good guys?
Fossil fuels. Well, what we've found in our analysis is that the Australian Retirement Trust sustainability related investment option, as well as Aware Super's option and Uni Super's option. So those are the 3 out of the 11 we analysed that didn't have any exposure to the companies we're concerned about, and it's so that's obviously some good news. But in terms of what ASIC could potentially do and the stick that ASIC could wave, the specifics of that I'm going to have to leave to ASIC, unfortunately. However, the commissioner has recently made some comments in the media around just how big of a concern this is for the regulator at the moment. And ASIC are very concerned and are treating this as a big priority. And so, we can only hope that the regulator will investigate this to the fullest extent.
We certainly can. Well, Brett, you've done great work, you and your company, Market Forces. We appreciate the effort you've put in, and we very much appreciate your time coming on the Green Canary today. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
And that was a very depressing interview. Thank you for bringing that to us this week.
I'm so sorry. I tried to make it more interesting with the question about salt and vinegar chips, but yeah, it's just, it beggars belief, really, doesn't it?
Yeah, honestly. And you know what? I will say good on Market Forces, because I do think that they do fantastic work. They do fantastic research. And they also put together some really handy consumer sort of grids so that you can understand what you're looking at more clearly, because all of these places are going to be trying to obscure what they're doing to some extent. And it is fantastic to have people like this doing the work for us and giving us guidance when we're trying to pick super funds and banks.
Nicely said. They're good people. And so let's give them a plug. Marketforces.org.au is where you'll find them.
Have you signed up to Green Super?
No, not yet. It's something we keep talking about. And
I know. I'm going to keep beating you up about this.
And I'm scared of being beaten up by you. It's one of the things that keeps me awake at night. So I'll probably do it in 5 minutes. So let's race into mulch, quickly finish the pod, and I'll go and sign up to Green Super. I promise. Here it is, first little mulch, first little bit and piece at the end of the pod. The ACT, Elfy, is about to ban the sale of fossil fuel cars from 2035.
That is amazing.
It is amazing, isn't it? I mean, look, we know the ACT is the most progressive sort of place in the country. We also know that, because I think we covered it on the pod earlier this year, that they did announce financial incentives for people to buy zero emissions vehicles.
Yeah. Not only that, but also they have all that new infrastructure as well in Canberra. Exactly
right. So, EVs and Canberra are about to get along very well. The ACT has now released plans to end the sale of new petrol and diesel vehicles by 2035. It's also aiming for 80 to 90% of new vehicle sales to be zero emissions vehicles by 2030. So it's moving fast. Now, in fairness, there have been some concerns that lower income residents will be cut out because EVs are still much more expensive than regular vehicles.
Yeah.
Even ACOS, the Australian Council of Social Services, has had a bit of a crack at the ACT, but the ACT emissions reduction minister, and I love that they have an emissions reduction minister, Shane Rattenbury, says the ACT Gov is doing whatever it can. It's doing all sorts of zero interest loans, stamp duty waivers, things like that. So, it's going to go ahead and hopefully there's a little bit of social justice along with the good environmental news there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they're very important partners in this. All right. And the next story that you have brought to me is a call to ban fossil fuel advertising. So Comms Declare, which is a group that's made up of 300 marketing, public relations, advertising and media professionals, as well as 80 organisations that have committed to not supporting companies contributing to the growth of fossil fuel emissions in Australia, has launched a campaign of its own calling for a tobacco-style blanket ban on advertising by coal, oil and gas companies in Australia. So we know very well, Ant, that you will not see cigarette advertising on television. You will not see alcohol advertising, I believe, in certain times.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think kids are allowed to watch ads for Jim Beam or whatever at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. But this is basically a call to see fossil fuels scrapped from TV ads too. What do you make of it?
I think it's a really good idea. I think it's it's one of those sort of provocative ideas. These are public relations, advertising and people putting this forward. So they're good at sort of tweaking people's
True.
sort of responses to things. So they're making people like you and I sit across the table from each other in a podcast and go, well, what do you think about this? And the answer is, actually, I do think it's a good idea. I also think it's completely unworkable. I think they're probably some of the biggest spenders. They're certainly some of the biggest greenwashers. You know, some of the ads from big petrol companies and stuff.
Oh, God, help us. Yes, no, I know exactly what you're talking about.
So it's a great intellectual idea. Will it happen? Don't know. Don't think so, though.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. But I do think, like you said, you know, they know what they're doing with that message. And you know what? I actually like what the Comms Declare Chief Executive Belinda Noble said on the news this week. She said that we founded in recognition that, famously, marketing and PR has been used for decades to help polluting companies, and we want that to stop.
Well,
which I like.
I do like that as well. And the next time a major fossil fuel company comes to one of those sort of companies and offers them squillions for their campaign, I look forward to them saying, no, thank you.
Yeah. I mean, that's the real test, isn't it?
All right, look, last story. And I just love this story. We mentioned it at the top. It's about crocs. And, you know, I've never been to tropical Queensland, so I don't understand crocs. I've been to the NT, but not the crocky bit. I just don't understand crocs. But the story is that there are some large saltwater crocodiles in the Whitsunday region that will soon be monitored by Queensland government scientists in an effort to determine their movements in relation to nearby popular tourism areas. And the reason, I mean, this is a story. It's good. They're doing this. I can't believe it hasn't happened 100 years ago.
Yeah, the story is that it wasn't happening before.
That's exactly to me what the story is. Like, here are some of the stats. This area, the Proserpine River, which is not far from Airlie Beach, which I'm sure a lot of people know is not far from the Whitsundays, Hamilton Island, all that. It's got 5.5 crocs per kilometre. That must be per kilometre of river, or anyway, the average in Queensland is only 1 per kilometre. So you've got 5.5 times more croc. These are also the biggest crocs in Queensland. So you've got the highest density of the biggest crocs, and they've just gone, maybe we should come to them.
You know what, Ant? I've got to say I love crocodiles, so I love that you brought this story, and I have been on a boat down that river before, seen the tiny little baby ones. They're amazing. And I've got a little fact for you about crocodiles. Did you know that there's a theory that they have a thing called negligible senescence, which means that they don't age at the rate of every other animal in the world? Basically, they age very slowly, if not at all.
Really?
Yes.
What kills them?
Eventually, this is the theory, don't know whether this is true, they just die by means that aren't natural. So they will starve to death because they can't sustain themselves because they get too large, or they'll get hit by things and die that way.
So crocs are not only sort of impervious to any predator, but they're immortal.
Impervious to time, yes.
Wow. Elfy,
I mean, that's a theory. Who knows?
you have blown my mind. Please end the podcast while I go away and change my super and contemplate the universe.
Two important activities. All right. Well, before we head off today, as always, we would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we're recording, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We'd like to pay our respect to elders past and present and acknowledge that this land was stolen, never ceded.
Very nicely said. And I'd just like to remind people that we're out there on Twitter. Say hello to us. A lot of you did this week. It was good fun. We had a chat at, what are we? Green Canary Pod. We're at Green Canary Pod on Twitter, and we are at Green Canary Media on Instagram. And we put out a little newsletter. It had the best analysis in the country of Tanya Plibersek's speech that was written by me last week. And you really should have subscribed. About 15 people subscribed last week. Loved the people who did that. And I try to answer every one of your emails. Apologies if I didn't, but I think I got to them all. Anyway, hello@thegreencanary.co. And you will get that email in your inbox, and that newsletter, that is. And like I said, off to change my super and to ponder the immortality of crocodiles.
All right, we'll see you next week then.
It might take me a week.
Bye.
Bye.